Hi all, so today we're going to talk about the AK-9, which you probably remember as the AK-12C. In a recent update, it got reworked. Instead, it now uses the 9x39 ammunition by default instead of 7.62, and it got a name change. That is largely the major differences the AK-9 received, but nonetheless, it's still worth talking about because it's a good gun. I actually quite like it a lot. In fact, the entire reason I used this gun prior to the change was to grind for the 9x39 ammo, and now they just made it default. So we can talk about it. So, it's mostly a close-ranged carbine with decent performance out to mid-range. It's got a very easy-to-control recoil pattern, it's got good damage, it has a torso multiplier, so you can 4-shot to the body at any range, which is very handy, and it hits surprisingly hard in close range, able to 2-headshot as well. On the whole, despite its small ammunition, it is a very nice, reliable gun. Its only main drawback being its velocity, which limits pretty heavily at range, and the magazine size makes chaining kills together pretty difficult. In the scope department, I would highly recommend running whatever red dot you like. I'm very partial to the Barska Electro, the Coyote, and the Comp Aim Point, depending on how many kills I have, but it is entirely up to you. I just wouldn't recommend a bigger scope because it's Phantom Forces. You don't really need bigger scopes than anything that's not a rifle, like a full-blown sniper rifle, so just run a red dot. In the barrel slot, you actually have two options here, so uniquely this gun has access to an integral suppressor. And you'd think this might be okay. It has its advantages and its disadvantages. So, notably, even with the integral suppressor, you do retain your 4-shot body shot at long range, as long as you're hitting the torso. The problem is it hits your velocity even further, and, well, that's about all it does. It also slowly, drags down your equip model speed, all the other little fun stats, but largely outside of hitting your normal damage stats, it doesn't actually do that much. So, it's handy, you do squeeze out a bit more damage, and most notably 15 more meters of full damage range, which is handy. The problem is you can't take any recoil attachments, and if you're like me, having recoil control is very, very handy. Personally, I'm partial to the compensator. Reducing horizontal recoil is always a win in my book. Other options are totally fine. In fact, you could even probably run a muzzle booster if you really wanted to, because the recoil isn't that bad, but I'm partial to the compensator. In the grip slot, pretty much everything here is tolerable. I like the angled for the aim speed and nice recoil overall. I've had good luck with the stubby, the pistol works. If you want to do a hipfire build, vertical works fine. The lasers are all valid options, although I'd probably run them in the other slot rather than the underbarrel. Speaking of the other slot, well, you have a couple options here. You have your lasers, which are fine. You have cantids, which are funny, in that you don't use them. And then you have a couple stock options. So if you want to go for pure move speed, you could remove it altogether, or, in my case, I take the full stock because recoil control is always desirable to me. I like having good recoil control, so I like the full stock. To me, it's absolutely worth the hit, and while I've tried it without the stock, I prefer having the recoil control. Sue me. So in your ammo slot, you have the aforementioned 7.62x39 that the gun used to fire prior to getting changed to the AK-9. This is not a good conversion. So the idea behind the AK-12C, or the 7.62 conversion, or whatever you want to call it, is that it just turns it into a regular rifle. You want to know the problem with this is? You lose your 4-shot at range, because you lose the torso multiplier. So basically what you're getting here is you're getting a AK-12 that doesn't have as much damage, in exchange for having, carbine soft stats, but at that point just use a regular AK-12. If you want damage output, just run the AK-9, the standard ammo, because it hits harder and it keeps a 4-shot out to range. Really, the only advantage you're gaining on 7.62 is the velocity, and you can learn to cope with that. As for the other ammo options, they're kind of pointless. I mean, you already have the 4-shot torso, so armor piercing isn't needed for the torso buff, and hollow point is just troll, and tracerless is just useless. So, it's a good gun. I quite like it. I used it primarily to the rework, back when it was the AK-12C. However, I think it is actually in a much better state now compared to pre-rework. Oops. Because just having that 9x39 really helps. This gun really benefits from having that 4-shot torso, at all ranges, which is super handy and super easy to do because this gun has next to no pull as long as you, build it for recoil. If you build it for move speed or hipfire, yeah, it still has decent recoil control, but it's not as good as, you'd hope. It's workable, but it's not ideal. And honestly, at the ranges you're fighting at most of the times now in Phantom Forces, you don't even need to go into a hipfire build. Most of the time, If you're close enough to enemies to be able to hit fire, you probably don't need the full build for it anyway. That's a nade I'm probably going to blow up. Damn, in fact, I think that nade just bounced off my forehead. Still, I really like the AK-9. I think it's a very, very well-rounded gun. I think because of its rework to now fire 9x39 by default, I think it's much easier to use than it used to be. Because honestly, prior to the patch, it felt like you just had to grind the 9x39 conversion or just pre-buy it outright for the gun to actually be, you know, viable. God, I don't understand these new maps at all. Yeah, prior to the patch, it kind of felt like you had to have the 9x39 conversion for it to be a viable option. Now it feels much more good out of the box. Like, the attachments do help it, don't get me wrong. I really love having a full stock, and I love having a compensator and a sight that I actually like, and yada-da-da-da. But honestly, it's a good gun out of the box. It's just a little underwhelming. Because, well, at the end of the day, there's a huge bloat of AK platforms in this game, especially AK-12 platforms in this game. And if you want a unique carbine option, boy oh boy, the AK-12 certainly is not it. Or the AK-9, sorry, I'm still used to calling it by the old name. There's a lot of carbine bloat, and even being a fairly mid-rank gun at rank 51, you do unlock a lot more unique guns earlier. So while it's good, and it's easy to use, and it's reliable, and everything, you know, you'd like out of a standard weapon, because having a standard weapon that's just good is, you know, very important. It's ultimately not that interesting. It's just another AK. Which, if you really love your AK-12s, you know, very cool. But if you're looking for guns that are actually interesting, and actually have something unique going about them, to be honest, this rifle's probably just not going to be it for you. I think it's worth using. I mean, if you unlock it, I would say use every gun you unlock just to see if you like it or not. There's no reason not to. I mean, if you unlock something, you may as well give it a try, right? But it's certainly not a gun that's worth pre-buying. Just because it's not strong enough to justify pre-buying to grind kills with, and it's also not unique enough to justify pre-buying to have fun with. It's not like, say, some of the more competitive submachine guns or assault rifles where, you know, you can justify pre-buying them because they're good. They'll let you use a lot of kills to grind up pretty quick. Which is what you'd want out of pre-buying a mid-rank gun, especially if you're a newer player. But it's also not unique in the fact that, say, you know, say what you will about it, but pre-buying the BFG is common because it's a one-shot rifle. And I can't really fault people for that. It's also not, like, say, a G11, where the G11 is really unique and fun to use because it's a G11. You know, it just doesn't offer anything that other carbines don't, while also simultaneously not being good enough to justify a full-blown pre-buy by itself. But I think if you unlock it, you know, it's absolutely worth a shot. There's no reason not to try it. It's not like it's an outright horrible gun. I just think it's just fine. It's just another AK-12 platform rifle in the game. And while we have a lot of those, you're probably going to be sick of those by the time you unlock this thing, and in general, because holy shit, this game has so many damn AK-12s. You know, at least it's kind of interesting. At least it is the funky ammo type, and at least it's pretty well performing, so give it credit where it's due. I like it. I think it's worth using. Not exceptional, but, you know, it's a solid gun. And that's really all you can ask for, to be honest.